Magic the Gathering is a weird game that has a lot of weird rules, and one of the most unique aspects is the stack. When you play a spell, it goes onto the stack before the battlefield, and every player gets a chance to respond. In a 1v1 format, priority usually ends up being you cast a spell, your opponent checks if they want to do anything, and then passes, and you continue onward. But in Commander, there's twice as many players, and therefore a lot more chances to use priority and interact with the stack. And a lot of people do not use priority to its full extent in Commander. Mastering priority will seriously improve your EDH gameplay and help you win more games. But before I tell you how to properly use priority, if you like my videos, consider subscribing and check out the Patreon. First, let's look at the actual rules. Priority is the right to cast a spell, activate an ability, or take a special action. Players can't cast spells, activate abilities, or take special actions at a time when they do not have priority. The player with priority may put as many spells or abilities on the stack as they wish. But before anything can resolve, all players must pass priority without anything being added further to the stack. So casting a spell and activating abilities go on the stack and everybody has to pass on them. But what's a special action? Playing a land, turning a face-down creature face up, an effect that lets you take an action at a later time, like dominating Lycid, effects from static abilities which allow a player to take an action to ignore the effect, like Leonin Arbiter. The card Circling Vultures, because of the way it is templated, it is not an activated ability, it's like a special action, and it's just this one card, it's very weird. Suspending a card from hand is a special action. Adding a companion from outside of the game to your hand is also a special action. Foretelling a card from your hand, rolling the planar die if you're playing a game of Plane Chase, and if you're doing a conspiracy draft, turning a conspiracy face up. And whenever you do a special action, you receive priority after it. So when you play a land, your opponents don't get to respond. Priority just goes back to you. Now, there is an exception to this. Let's say you had a landfall creature in play. When you play the land, that ability triggers. Since a triggered ability goes on the stack, it can't resolve until everyone has a round of priority. So then, when do you actually get priority? So you get priority after you do a special action, but also, the first time you get priority in any turn is the upkeep. There is no priority during the untap step. Nobody can respond and do something before you get to untap. The upkeep is when everyone gets a chance to react. And this is often one of the best times to mess with an opponent, since it's before the draw step. So it's before they actually draw their card for turn, and they have one less card to respond to whatever instant speed shenanigans you have. And other than that untap step, everyone gets priority during every phase. Upkeep, draw, pre-combat main phase. The combat step alone has 5 different places where everyone gets priority. Beginning of combat, declare attackers, declare blockers, damage, and end of combat. And then everyone gets priority during main phase 2 and the end step. And it's important to know all of these steps, especially for the combat phase. A lot of people don't realize exactly when and where you get to respond and do things. For example, if you have a pump spell in hand, you can use it on your creature and then attack. This might incentivize a player to block if they don't want to take more damage. But alternatively, you can attack, wait, see if they block, and then choose to pump your creature. And that end of combat step is also really good for certain cards. Reconnaissance, for example. This is an enchantment that lets you pay 0 mana to remove target attacking creature you control from combat and untap it. Now if you attack and then remove it from combat, that seems useless, right? Then what would the point of attacking be? But you can just use this ability after the damage step, during the end of combat step, because your creatures will still be in combat, so they're legal targets for the ability, essentially giving your whole team vigilance. Or you can attack, wait to see what they block with, and if they block with something that'll kill your creature, you can just remove it from combat. Reconnaissance is a card that really powers up once you know all of the different combat steps. Another priority mistake that players make all the time is jumping priority. Let's say I cast a spell. Timmy might excitedly jump in and throw out a counterspell, but that means that the player immediately to my left, Spike, gets to hold onto their counterspell when they might have cast it had priority gone to them. It's very helpful to let other people use up their removal before priority gets to you. Give everyone else a chance to use their spells. Excitingly jumping in and using your removal might make you end up wasting it. Another important tool for priority is priority holding. You can put as many spells and abilities on the stack at once and retain priority the entire time, assuming the spells and abilities are instant speed. Now, none of the effects will resolve until you pass priority, but you can put them all there. Now, this can help you out in some niche situations. Imagine you're going to cast a Walking Ballista where X is 10, and you want to deal 10 damage to knock out your opponent. Now, if you were to remove one counter and target your opponent and pass priority, they could slam you with a Crow's Hand Grip, and then that's it. You lose your Walking Ballista and the 9 counters. But had you cast the Walking Ballista, assuming no other abilities triggered when it entered the battlefield, you could remove all 10 counters by holding priority, targeting your opponent, then pass the turn to them. Now, it's much harder to stop 10 individual triggers on the stack than to just destroy one card. Speaking of Crow's Hand Grip, let's talk about Split Second. This is a really great ability that stops people from putting spells and abilities on the stack while a split second spell is on the stack. One cool thing about this is if I cast a split second spell and I have a Gutter Snipe on the battlefield, Gutter Snipe will still trigger. All spells and abilities still trigger normally, but my opponents can't respond outside of special actions, making the Gutter Snipe trigger almost uncounterable. All of these tips and tricks for priority are well and good, but the most powerful thing you can do with priority is priority bullying and mana bullying. Here's an example. Let's say I'm casting a card that will win the game if it resolves. Thassa's Oracle, for example, and I have 0 cards in my deck. Spike might have a red Elemental Blast in hand to counter my Oracle. But since they're first in priority, and they see that Johnny has 2 open blue mana, they might pass priority. This forces Johnny to use their counterspell or lose the game. And this frees Spike to play something next turn without having to worry about the counterspell. This is priority bullying. And it might seem risky because what if the other players don't have removal? Don't you just lose? Well, if we refer to Rule 117.4, it states that if all players pass in succession, that is if all players pass without taking any actions between passing, the spell or ability on the stack resolves. If the stack is empty, the phase or step ends. Therefore, if someone taps a land for mana, this will create a new round of priority because they took an action. So Johnny can just say, I don't have a counterspell, I'm going to tap a land for a blue and pass priority. Then it passes to the next player, and then back to me, which I would continue to pass, and then Spike would get the chance again to cast their spell and counter my Thassa's Oracle. That's priority bullying. Now, mana bullying is if you take it a little bit further. Let's say we did that whole hullabaloo. Spike passes to Johnny, Johnny taps a land because they don't actually have counterspell in hand, they just had open mana. Priority goes back to Spike. If they pass again, that would force Johnny to tap their other untapped island. Otherwise, they would lose the game. So then they have to tap their other mana, so priority goes back around again. And in this case, Spike could theoretically do this as much as they wanted to force all other players, other than me casting the game-winning spell, to tap all of their mana sources. Then counter my spell, and then going back to Spike's turn, Spike now gets to play with the other players totally tapped out. This is relatively niche, ultimately, so mana bullying is not super relevant. And especially for casual commander, it's even less relevant. But priority bullying is still very relevant in casual commander. I gave a pretty extreme example with if this spell resolves, I win the game. But there's a lot of times where something threatening gets thrown down onto the stack, and you could counter it, or remove it, or whatever, but you could also not. You can force other players to deal with it. Yeah, that creature might be problematic for you, but it might be twice as bad for another player, in which case, you can just pass priority and force the other player to deal with it. I think utilizing priority bullying, avoiding priority jumping, and knowing all the times when you have a chance to actually interact is really important for improving your gameplay, and it'll help you win a lot more Commander games. If you have any other tips or tricks about priority, let me know in the comments below. I'm super curious to hear about it. Thank you so very much for watching. Subscribe for more.